Love to start with a high five. That must be the Slush tone. Hi, everybody. My name is Zack, and I'm really excited to be here today. So when I first got invited to join this session a couple days ago, I was a bit intimidated. Because while I talk quite a lot, I don't ever tend to talk about entrepreneurship itself, but rather the content of our work. So to try to quell my questions about what would be valuable to you as an audience, I went to a couple of my friends and said, if you were sitting in the audience, what would you want to hear from me? And they gave me three answers. The first was they wanted to know, why would I leave a safe and comfortable career to start a social business that had no necessary prospects? The second was they wanted to know how we managed to get ourselves established in that first year in a very tough market. And the third was, how do we know that we're actually making impact and therefore stay motivated in what we're doing? So after hearing those responses from them, I got less intimidated and actually quite excited, because those are important questions that I don't normally spend time thinking about. So for the next 15 minutes, I'll do my best to give some answers to those questions to you all that I've thought through over the last day or so. Before I do that, I should probably step back to explain a little bit about what Reboot is. To give some perspective to the answers about the organization that we built. We are, in short, a think-do tank that is dedicated to tackling kind of the most pressing social challenges around the world. We take consulting projects to build an empirical evidence base on how these challenges could be addressed in different ways. And then we use our access to high-level senior leadership at organizations like the World Bank or the UN or USAID to try to advocate for both the why and the how they should work differently in what they're doing. To put that in real terms and not just jargon, over the last few years, we've built the world's first mobile phone-based voter administration system for the fragile government of Libya after the revolution to help them incrementally inch towards progress. We've worked with the World Bank in the oil-rich Niger Delta to try to create new ways of understanding public corruption and new ways of addressing it. And we're actively working with the mayor's office in New York City to try to address criminal justice reform, to keep nonviolent drug offenders out of prison, and to help immigrants who have low literacy understand their rights within the justice system. So that's Reboot. We just celebrated our 5th anniversary, and we're about 20 people with a small office in Nigeria. So with that as context, I will go into some of those questions that my friends raised. The first, again, was why would we leave our cushy jobs to start this thing called Reboot? Well, our work is very idealistic. And if you were to look at our website, you would see that we have a very rosy view of what we're trying to do. But the core driver of starting Reboot was actual anger. We were angry that in the 21st century, when humanity is more capable and connected than we've ever been, we face threats to our very survival that make our existence as uncertain as it was 1,000 years ago, and arguably more so. We're also angry because despite all of these gains that society and humanity have made, they're very unfairly distributed. There's billions of people around the world who don't know where their next meal is going to come from, don't have access to quality water or health care. That does not need to be the case, but it is because of powerful forces that are entrenched and do not have incentive to change the way that they're doing things. So that was the anger that motivated us. But the truth is, I've been angry about these things for my entire professional career. So a more nuanced answer to the question is, what changed about my anger that led me to start Reboot in 2010? Well, it takes a little bit of a backstory. In 2008, I tried to channel my anger into hope with the election of President Barack Obama in the US. Like many others, I flocked to the administration and wanted to work with and support what they were doing, and took a job at a think tank in DC that was working closely with the White House. I worked on a bunch of different issues around policy and advocacy, but what was most important was early into the administration, the BP oil spill rocked the Gulf of Mexico. It was one of the biggest domestic crises in America for more than 100 years. Many of us around the administration were urging the federal government to take meaningful action as the only agency that had the means to really sustainably address the problems that were created by the oil spill. With great sadness, I watched my president decide to do little. The logic provided by his advisors, which he accepted, was, well, these 5 Gulf states are conservative. It doesn't matter what we do, they won't vote for us in 2012. And if we try to do something and fail, We might lose Ohio or other states that matter in 2012. So we'll just do as little as we can get away with. This cynical position broke me. Now, it's not to say that I was naive to the horrors that Washington can create. I'd been working there for 5 years. But from this president, in which our country was banking on would bring a new calculus to addressing our most pressing social problems, it was utterly depressing. I realized that I could not maintain a focus on my job that I had become disillusioned with. In that period of real darkness, I had the privilege to meet a person who became my co-founder at Reboot. She was then working at the UN and facing some similar frustrations with her institution. Through our conversations, we realized if we don't want to be a part of the problem, then we need to be a part of the solution. And thus, Reboot was born, to try and create evidence and models for how our governments and our other leading institutions could and should do things differently. So that's us. Let's get to the question of how did we establish a mandate and an organization around that angry principle. Well, one thing is to say the upside of disillusionment is it makes it very easy to take a leap of faith and leave a career that you no longer believe in. So to be frank, my co-founder and I didn't have a lot of hesitation about taking that leap and starting something new. In my case, if I'm really honest, it was the only way I could stay sane and maintain my moral principles. So in late 2010, in the course of 3 months, I sold my car, we pooled our funds, pulled together the brand that you still see here today, got our legal documentation together, and all that good stuff. We also got our first few gigs. And I'll be honest, in those first 3 months, those opportunities are not necessarily the things that we were most passionate about, but they did pay the bills and give us the cash flow so that we could really get started, hire employee number 1, and get an office space. At the end of that 3 months, something really important began to happen, and it was the Arab Spring. In January 2011, my co-founder and I were glued to the news watching the developments in Tunisia. We were concerned about the uncertain future that these events foretold. And we saw a glimmer of what might happen across the world as people increasingly react to governments and institutions that are not accountable and not responsive to their demands and needs. We grew more concerned when the movement spread to Egypt, knowing that country's importance to the region. And we were also worried about the actions our governments, the rich Western nations, might take. We were worried that they would come in and further exacerbate these social dynamics as they had long contributed to. So in retrospect, we did something that was maybe kind of crazy. In February 2011, 2 weeks after President Mubarak had stepped down, we bought tickets to Cairo and embarked on a 3-month ethnographic study across the country to try to understand what was really happening on the ground and what did the majority of Egyptians really want from this process of change. What did the janitor in Indaba, one of the poorest neighborhoods in Cairo, want to expect out of a new government? We knew their needs and demands were more nuanced than just democracy. They wanted actual economic benefits of specific types. So we came home and wrote up our findings in a report and forced it on all of our friends and contacts across the UN, the World Bank, US government, and tried to bring the voices of the Egyptians that we'd heard and captured to these policymakers sitting far away in Washington. Now, we'd like to hope that our ideas had impact and influence over the policymaking process, but we can never know for sure. And certainly some of the developments of the last 4 or 5 years would lead me to think, well, no, nobody listened. But what we do know for sure is it was very successful for our business, that risk to, on our own cost, jump off to Egypt to focus on something that we ultimately cared about. Just a couple months after we returned, the World Bank engaged us to do a similar study in Tunisia. That was transformational for us. It gave us our first real badge of credibility and led to a partnership with the World Bank, which has expanded to this day. And though we've had many, many ups and downs and mistakes and missteps, we've never really worried about where our next project was coming from since then. So that first risk, based purely on our belief that what was happening in the Arab Spring was urgently important, led to the success that has come every year since then. So that made us who we are. How do we keep going? How do we know that we're doing something good and therefore stay motivated? Well, the first thing we try to remind ourselves as we explore these very important questions is that the work we're doing is a long game. The problems we're addressing are the result of centuries or even millennia of developments. they are not going to change quickly or in a handful of years. So we know that we have to have a more balanced view about what we can do. And to look for our impact, we try to identify more tangible and immediate indicators that we can look to as an organization. So what are those? The first of them is our clients. We work with some of the world's most important and leading institutions, and they keep coming back to us, even though we're often challenging their assumptions and their ways of working. Respectfully, of course, but we don't come in as a consultant focused on making money. We only take engagements where we're coming in to be a structured partner in change, and that's working. The second is the change we've seen in our industry. Over the last 5 years, the biggest organizations, the World Bank, the UN, DFID, USAID, they're starting to really embrace more adaptive, contextual, and participatory approaches to their work. In no way do we claim ownership of that change, but we do know that we've been a respected and loud voice among many others calling for that reform. The third is our competitors. They say that flattery, imitation is the highest form of flattery, of which we've experienced. I can count at least 5 organizations that have started up in the last couple years that are in our image. Some of them have been kind enough to take our copy directly from our website, hopefully demonstrating that they believe very much in the ideas that we're putting forward. Another major international management consultancy has started an internal startup that has been going around and telling our clients that they are the adult Reboot. It's great. Good to have an adult version of ourselves. We're not upset by these things. We're actually excited by it. Our whole point was to help catalyze an army of like-minded actors who were trying to promote the same ideas. So we welcome competitors. It's a good thing when more people are trying to advance the approaches and ideas that we are putting out there. The last indicator for sort of impact that I see is our team. I have the privilege to work with some of the most intelligent and passionate people I've ever met. I know the career opportunities they have, and they're good ones. They wouldn't come and work for our relatively crappy salaries and our long days if they didn't believe what we're doing. They humble and inspire me every day, and I don't think I'd get out of bed without them. So I really believe in what they do, and these things taken together are some of the ways we try to evaluate if what we're doing is working. Now that said, we're never complacent. We are constantly self-critical. We ask ourselves in organic ways every day and in structured ways every month and every quarter and every year, are we doing the right things? Not for our business. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day of the business at a social enterprise to say, okay, we've made payroll again, we've got a new hire, we've got a new project, but those things are not really tied to our mission. So we're always examining new ways to think about whether or not we're having influence and impact and questioning what we're doing. Now, I'll end with a question that my friends didn't raise, but I thought was maybe relevant to this group. What have I learned from these last 5 years of trying to build a social enterprise? This struggle to juggle, as I called it. A lot of things, of course, but there's a few that I'll try to pull out here. The first is that you can attract and retain the highest level of talent without top compensation. We have found that there are people from every age group and demographic who are willing to work for something they truly believe in. And so we've stopped selling ourselves short about the level of talent that we can attract. The second is that HR is really important, and HR is the worst thing in the world. It's a topic that I had never thought much about before starting Reboot, and now occupies an undue share of my attention. We know that recruiting and attracting the best talent is critical to our ability to have impact in the world. That's the great part and the important part. But at the same time, having to negotiate salaries with people that I deeply care about, or at the worst, letting someone go when our paths no longer converge, these are the things that ruin my day and my week and keep me up at night. But I've learned the importance of HR. The third is that you can speak truth to power no matter where you're coming from, as long as you bring the right facts and you're willing to recognize the constraints that those wielding power have. I've learned the difference between arguing and advocating. And though there's a time for both, for sure, I continuously am reminded by the lesson that my dad always taught me: you often win more flies with honey than not. So I don't stand here in front of you today suggesting that building a social enterprise hasn't been incredibly difficult and incredibly exhausting. It has. I've probably taken a good few years off the end of my life in the experience of Reboot. but I do know that I would not wake up every day and do anything else. Thank you so much for letting me be here with you today. Happy slushing, everybody.